On June 7, 1892, Homer Plessy strode through the streets of his native New Orleans toward the train station. This was no idle stroll. He was about to test the 14th Amendment's promise of equal protection under the law. He would board a white passenger car and refuse to move to the black one. Keith, June 7, 1892, Press Street Depot. What is Homer Plessy doing there?
Homer Plessy is attempting to be arrested, booked, and tried for violating the segregation laws of 1890. Well, I think he was very confident that he wouldn't be hung that day because there was a serious plan in effect to actually orchestrate his arrest.
Conceived by a group of black Republicans, Plessy's gambit was a calculated act of civil disobedience, breaking Louisiana's law in the hope of landing the case in the United States Supreme Court. The group had chosen Homer Plessy for one overriding reason. He was so light-complexioned that he was indistinguishable from whites.
Why did they need a guy light and bright and damn near white?
What they wanted to do is to tell the courts that, you know, you're putting someone on there whose race has to be determined by a train conductor. How can this be the basis of law when every train conductor has to look carefully, right, at people's skin and look and say, oh, I think this person is a Negro.
Negro meter.
Skin. Yeah, exactly, like, as if they would have a Negro meter or something like that. It's patently absurd. Plessy gets his ticket. He goes right past the colored car, sits in the white car, and that's when a plainclothes officer warns him to get off the train, and when he doesn't move, arrests him and takes him off.
The case did make it all the way to the Supreme Court, but the justices didn't do what Plessy and his backers hoped. In a momentous decision that would shape the next half-century, they upheld Louisiana's segregation law. The Supreme Court decided that separate but equal was the law of the land. Justice might be blind, but the United States Constitution would no longer be colorblind. The Plessy decision dealt the final blow to the brief, flickering hope of Reconstruction. Now, the law relegated African Americans to the margins of white society. Free? Yes. Equal? No.
That drastically reduces the horizons for black people. So what they begin to do is they begin to live within the limitations set by the federal government and these state governments. It doesn't mean that traditions of struggle end. Throughout the darkest days of Jim Crow segregation, the black freedom struggle never goes away.
While some black leaders advocated leaving the South behind, there were other influential voices urging African Americans to resist the siren song of the North and to stay right where they were.
1/3 of the population of the South is of the Negro race. No enterprise can disregard this element of our population and reach the highest success.
Born a slave himself, Booker T. Washington believed that former slaves and their masters shared a common role in the creation of the New South to help transform it economically. If the South was ever going to leave that antebellum plantation mentality behind, it would require the mutual cooperation of black people and white people alike.
Booker T. Washington was a very practical man because he was a person who could see the world as it is.
Those of my race who depend on bettering their condition, I would say, cast down your bucket where you are.
He's saying to the black people, you don't need to leave, you don't need to go north, you can stay here.
As a practical man, Washington argued that political rights for African Americans could only be won from a position of economic strength and self-sufficiency.
He believed that eventually white people would come to realize the value of black workers.
Pass it down, making friends in every manly way of the people of all races by whom you are surrounded.
He saw himself as a mediating figure between the white South and the black South.
The product of a vocational education himself, Washington argued that by learning a trade, African Americans would hold the key to their own advancement. He went on to found the Tuskegee Institute, which trained African Americans in vocational and technical skills and advocated self-help. Tuskegee was not alone. The exhibit was the brainchild of the leading black intellectual of the time, William Edward Burghardt DuBois. DuBois earned his first bachelor degree from Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, and soon became a leader among the emerging African-American intellectual elite.
There's a wonderful image of Du Bois arriving in Paris in top hat and tails, looking like the Edwardian man quintessential. He sees 1900 as a wonderful opportunity to give a counter-narrative to the stereotype view of the African American that has really gone global.
The Paris exhibition embodied Du Bois's philosophy about African American leadership. Unlike his contemporary Booker T. Washington, Du Bois believed that the masses of former slaves in the South, largely uneducated, had little chance of achieving liberation on their own. They needed to be shown the way.
How do we understand how a group of people who are oppressed rise? There's one idea that says you need talented leaders, you need extraordinary, exceptional, educated, the highest leaders, you're great thinkers. That was the talented 10th.
Du Bois was the first African American to earn a doctoral degree from Harvard. He believed it was the responsibility of his intellectual cohort to lead the fight for full citizenship.
Du Bois told black people that they could not wait to be citizens, that they were already on the books. We have a Constitution. It was signed and sealed in blood during that Civil War and during Reconstruction, and we were already citizens of the United States. You couldn't postpone fighting for justice. For Du Bois, you compromised something too great to wait and to say, one day.
Du Bois waged his battle for justice on several fronts. First, he established the Niagara Movement, whose Declaration of Principles would provide the basis of the modern civil rights movement. And then he co-founded the NAACP, the country's oldest and largest civil rights organization. He also believed that if African Americans were going to achieve equal rights, they had to prove their worth on the cultural front as well, as creators of a unique artistic tradition.
Du Bois was saying that literature can be an agency for profound change. I call it civil rights by copyright.
Du Bois and his colleagues aspired to set in motion a black literary movement that would compete on the highest levels of New York society.